Hello, everyone, to the Bitcoin Latam report. Today I have Joey Langenbrunner from the Nomad Layer. Welcome, Joey. This is the first time I interview somebody that is not a Bitcoiner officially, so I'm really happy to have you on the podcast.
Well, it is an absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm definitely a Bitcoiner for sure, for sure, for sure.
Yes, maybe it's not like your main activity, but everything related to residencies and avoiding taxes is also related to Bitcoin. So maybe just to start, you can give a little background about yourself and yeah, just so people have a better idea of who you are.
Yeah, sure. So, anyways, my name is Joey Langerbrunner. I am the founder and CEO of Nomad Layer. Okay, so Nomad Layer is essentially basically what I started is the first remote tax residency program using the jurisdiction of Prospera. Prospera is a special economic zone in Honduras. Okay, so just quickly go over that, and then we'll kind of go into what Nomad Layer and what in the world is a remote tax residency and how does this relate to sovereignty and Bitcoin and lower taxes? But anyways, so Prospera is a zone in Honduras off of the mainland of Honduras on the island of Rotan. And it is basically a zone where tons of Bitcoiners that are there. They're actually starting a Bitcoin district in the zone. They got tons of other altcoin stuff going on there. They got like biotech, they got like longevity. And essentially, this is kind of like a sovereign zone inside of Honduras. So they can kind of create their own rules and stuff like that, but it's still mainland Honduras. So essentially, what I did was a year ago is that I went there and basically promoted policy for a remote tax residency program for Bitcoiners, for people who want to be remote. So essentially for digital nomad to essentially leave their high tax country, especially if you're from Europe or Canada or Australia or something like this, leave those high tax places, pay tax to Prospera. And yes, we do accept Bitcoin. Okay. And basically, it's a completely remote setup where you can get tax residency in Prospera and then just travel the world and be free and be sovereign in the way that you choose to instead of just being stuck in one jurisdiction and paying taxes to one jurisdiction.
Great. Before we go over the perks and the advantages, the costs, and maybe the disadvantages as well, is there something that triggered like your intention of doing all of this? Were you always kind of a libertarian or somebody that didn't like taxes, or was it more recent? Like, just curious, what's the backstory there?
Yeah, sure. So a little bit about me. I'm from the US. And I actually almost ran for Congress under the Libertarian Party in the US, but that was about, I think, 10 years ago. And then I kind of realized that trying to work, within the system is kind of tough and challenging. And so that's when I started to get into Bitcoin, crypto, and stuff like that. And then I got into residencies and second passports and stuff like that. Anything, any way that I could try to promote the idea of sovereignty into, not just for myself and my family, but essentially anyone I encounter with. Because, what I always tell Bitcoiners is that you can have 100 Bitcoin, but if you are stuck as a slave in one jurisdiction and they close the borders, like what happened with COVID, your 100 Bitcoin's not going to matter too much. So you need to be physically sovereign as well. So, and with what's going on right now, especially with these Western countries, is these Western countries are printing so much fiat currency that these countries are just going broke. They're spending so much. So they're getting more and more desperate for tax revenue. I don't know if you just saw what I think it's the Netherlands. They just passed this new tax. I think it's going to go into in effect in 2028, I think, where they're going to start taxing unrealized capital gains, right? I think by 38 or
Like
36%.
35, like 35% or something like that. That's crazy.
Yeah, like 35% too much. So, so, even if you are a citizen of these countries and you leave, they're going to make sure that you're going to be paying tax somewhere. And if you're not paying tax somewhere, then I wouldn't be surprised if these countries start saying, "Hey, well, you might be in a zero tax jurisdiction, or you might be a digital nomad, and so you left the country, but you're still traveling around, and since you haven't been paying tax anywhere, you're going to pay tax to us, right?" So that's what I'm thinking is going to happen because these countries, again, as any Bitcoiner knows, these countries are going more and more broke. right? So we want to kind of defend ourselves. And the best way to defend yourself is just say, hey, why don't I pay, this is going to be hard for me to say when I'm the kind of one that says, like taxation is theft and all these kind of things. Maybe it's better just to pay tax a little bit, just pay a little bit of tax in some place and just make that the best experience as possible. And that will do a lot better than, let's say, living in a zero tax jurisdiction, even though I think every jurisdiction should be zero or close to zero, unless you're getting some great services back and the government's actually serving you, right? But let's pay a little tax somewhere with a government that is actually serving you, and you are the customer of this government, of this jurisdiction, and make it the best user experience possible. So that's what I was set out to do.
I understand. And before you actually chose Prospera for probably yourself, but also to make your business, have you been traveling around and looking for other options? I know that in this moment, well, what's the bigger landscape there? Do you have any recommendations also outside of Prospera, or do you experimented with other jurisdictions so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm glad that you brought up, Paraguay. I think Paraguay probably a few decades now, to be honest, has been probably one of the best options for digital nomads. And I would say Cyprus is good for Europeans. UAE has obviously been kind of the hot spot for a while. I think the UAE was much better 5, 10 years ago because, they introduced the 9% corporate tax, which if you make a little bit under a certain amount, it's still kind of zero depending on the zone that you're working with. But in practice, it's basically 9%. And there is some warnings that they might introduce a income tax in the UAE as well. Panama is great with a territorial taxation, but you really need to actually be living in Panama. So what do you do when you're just a digital nomad? You want to be free. You're constantly traveling around, or maybe you just have 2 or 3 home bases, which I think is the best to actually have 2 or 3 bases in case, wherever your base, if something goes wrong there, you can just jump to another home where you have a residency and roots and a community, which I think is best, right? And if you're jumping around and staying like under 6 months in each place, you still need a place where you can pay taxes that's compliant and stuff like that, especially if you don't want to pay tax in those places and you are truly out of that tax net, which I'm not going to sit here and give you tax advice in Canada or Australia or Europe. You need to talk to a licensed tax person for that. So you want to make sure you don't fall back into those tax systems, right? But how can you legally pay a small tax somewhere and just be in full compliance with these other jurisdictions while being sovereign, while being free? This is the problem I'm trying to solve. So Paraguay has been a great option for that. Paraguay, the authorities there have been making the program a little bit more complicated. And what we're doing in Prospera with my company Nomad Layer is that we will be constantly making the program better. So anytime a government comes out with a new program, it's amazing. It's great. And then for some reason, governments just make the programs worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So that's what I'm seeing in Paraguay. It's still a good option. I don't want to hate on Paraguay too much. I probably have over 100 friends with it, but essentially, when building Nomad Layer alongside with Prosper, I want to build something better. And so before I go into kind of why I think it's better and hear stuff like that, I just wanted to see if you had any other questions.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like every, jurisdiction that might be a good option for, digital nomads and everything, there is a window or maybe 10, 15 years where people start going. And once it becomes too popular, the government has like a better vision about that and they start imposing more rules. So it feels like it has been happening quite a lot. So you're saying basically it's impossible to just travel the world without paying taxes somewhere, right? Because I have also many friends and a few of them are actually doing that. And they're saying like, oh no, I'm not staying in any country more than X number of days, so I don't have to pay taxes anywhere. Why doesn't that work?
So this is going to be something interesting, and this might be a controversial opinion. And even me as a libertarian, I hate saying this. But let's say you're Canadian, okay? And let's say you left Canada, like you actually left their tax system and you haven't paid taxes to Canada in 3 years and you hardly been back. You maybe been back for maybe a few holidays to see your parents, but you're really not there. There's no bank account there. You don't have a car there. You don't have a lease there. You don't even have a girlfriend there, right? Got nothing in Canada, but you're just visiting family for a week and then you're out, right? Let's say you ever want to reintegrate into Canada, or you want to reintegrate into another jurisdiction, or maybe simply you just want to get a bank account, right? So here's a few things that where it might catch up to you, because what you need to realize is that you are kind of in a gray limbo area. So I'm speaking to your friends here, and I understand the drive to just not want to pay taxes anywhere, right? And so like that's why a lot of people, will do Paraguay, and I'll kind of get into the pros and cons of that, and and get into what Nomad Layer brought. But essentially, when you sign up and get a bank account, they always ask you this question: where's your current residency? Like, what are you going to say? Oh, it's in Paraguay. Okay. I mean, like, that's an option. But if you truly don't have a residency anywhere and you say, like, okay, well, it's here at this address. Okay. Basically, what they're saying when they ask you where your current residency is, they're asking, where are you currently paying taxes? That's kind of just behind that question, because banks want to do routine things like anti-money laundering, right? And so if you haven't been paying taxes anywhere, banks are probably they're gonna be hesitant about signing up an account for you, because it's like if you're not paying tax anywhere, and banks, as any Bitcoiner is gonna assume, like banks are not necessarily here for, helping us out. And so if you're not paying tax anywhere, they can say, hey, this could be a compliance risk. They might freeze your account. They might not even open up a bank account, because it's like, and like you're not paying taxes anywhere. So they're just going to assume that you are guilty, right? Because, they have their own laws and compliance that they're dealing with. So if you're not paying tax anywhere, they're just going to assume that you're money laundering, right? Um, and of course, like different banks will have different risks and stuff like that. And I'm not saying all banks will do this, but that is one issue you might come across. Also, if you haven't paid tax to Canada in the past 3 years, and then you try to reintegrate to Canada, because like, let's say like your dad is sick or your mom's sick or someone in your family is sick, and you try to reintegrate into Canada, Canada's going to ask you, so where have you been paying tax for the past 3 years? You're not going to say like, okay. And then what's stopping them from saying, okay, well, if you haven't paid taxes to any country in the past 3 years, then we're just going to assume that you're a tax resident here. So now you owe us taxes for the past 3 years, and oh yeah, you're late. So, there's going to be penalties and fees. Not saying Canada's going to do that, but what's stopping them from not doing that, right? So, like, there's, like, basically what I'm trying to describe is you're kind of in a limbo area where you're not protected. It's like going through life without, like, let's say, like, I'll come up with this term of, like, tax insurance. You wanna make sure you have tax residency, that you're paying taxes somewhere so no other jurisdiction tries to claim you. Long story short.
Yeah, so if some of my friends are listening that are in this situation, you should listen to Joey. So yeah, let's get right into it. What's kind of the pitch for Prospera? What are the costs? What are the advantages? And how does Nomad Layer help with all that process?
So that's a great question. So basically, when I went out to essentially design the program, and pitch it to Prospera, I wanted to make sure it was kind of like a one-stop shop for everything. So in the tax residency space, and I get it, like we're all Bitcoiners here and we're still talking about taxes. It can be exhausting. But anyways, when you're setting up tax residency, it's really important to set up substance in that jurisdiction. So if you just like, let's say you just get a residency permit in Paraguay, the issue with that is like, okay, that's great that you have a residency permit, but do you have a proof of address? Do you have a company there? Do you have a bank account there? Do you have this? Do you have that? Typically, they don't do that. And typically, they don't pay any tax to Paraguay. I do have some friends, because of, like, let's say tax insurance, they'll pay maybe $50, in taxes. So they paid something because they know that they need it, like they need to pay something. I'm not saying that, hey, it's like, I'm not going to come here and debate the moral argument of paying taxes or not, but they're paying that $50 or $100 in taxes just because, like, they know they want some sort of protection, right? So, like, we're kind of getting into that type of thinking, right? So with Nomad Layer and essentially the product that we built for all digital nomads in this world, and there's about 84 million of them currently. A certain portion of those are Americans. But what Nomad Layer brought is that you pay a flat tax of $5,000 US every year. Okay. It's not a little bit, but it's not a lot. Okay. So if you're making, let's say 40,000, 50,000 plus, this is probably a good program for you. Okay. Because if you're paying, 40, 50% in a high tax country, this is automatically cheaper, period. Then. So from that point of view, like the pitch is pretty easy. Now, what do you get? Because Prospera is in the business of attracting people to its jurisdiction, and they're going by the model of government as a service, right? So we want to be, well, not we, but I'm like Prospera wants to be a service to you. So a Nomad layer built on top of their governance platform is tax residency as a service. All right. So we want to make sure that you're happy. So what do you get for the $5,000 tax? We want to make sure that you actually get something. You're not paying this $5,000 tax and you don't know where it goes. Right. Okay. So like, for example, when you pay the $5,000 tax, 12% of it goes to the Honduran government and about 44% of it goes actually to the Prospera government. All right. So like, these are transparent percentages. So a certain portion of it goes to the federal government, right? Now, what do you get from it? You first get a tax residency certificate issued by the government of Prospera and signed and stamped by the Honduran government. So it is legally a Honduran tax residency certificate that you get within just a few weeks of signing up. Okay. And then we'll kind of go through the process. You also get a residency permit in Prospera, not Honduras, because if you want to get a residency permit in Honduras, that goes through the federal government, and that takes a little bit longer, which we can do that for clients as well, but it's not needed. And I can go into that why, a little bit later. So you get a residency permit in Prospera. You get a company in Prospera. All right. Now, this company is taxed at 1% territorial. So if your money does not derive from Prospera, it's 0%. Okay. And by the way, you get all this included with the 5,000. You also get liability insurance. So when you're actually in Prospera and God forbid, like, you actually cause an accident or something like that, you'll be covered, which is very important. Will help you get a bank account for personal and business, as well. And then not quite included in the $5,000 tax, but will also help you get a proof of address as well. So kind of like an optional, let's say, program we'll have for you. So, because you can go down to Prospera and rent a place. You can go to Prospera and buy a place for proof of address. And then we'll have like a separate program for kind of like a remote on like proof of address. So I'm going to stop there and see if you have any questions, because I feel like I threw a lot at you.
Yeah, actually, in regards of the actual residency, because Prospera is quite limited in size, right? And I have been there like 2, 3 years ago, so I imagine there's maybe more condos being built
Correct.
or actual houses. But at the moment, there's no like big residential development or whatever. Can you describe a little bit the actual setup there?
Yeah, yeah. So they have a larger luxury tower there. So every time I go to Prospera, it's called Duna. And so I'll typically stay there, and they have a convenience store inside that they just opened up like a week or two ago. They have a coffee shop there. They have some biolabs and some offices where people actually work in. And then they actually have access to a whole resort area that has a golf course, tons of beautiful villas. They also have a school there for children. So, if you do go down there with your family, there is a school, there's a few restaurants, and there's always new stuff that is opening up. They have a few development projects that are going to start being worked on any week now, two new developments. They're also going to open up a Bitcoin district there that is going to be primarily for Bitcoiners. There's also a co-working and coffee place called the Bitcoin Center. So you can go there, and they even got like a Bitcoin ATM. They don't take credit card for coffee. You can only pay in Bitcoin and cash. So there's tons of options. There's tons of cool things. But I'll say the coolest thing about going down to Prospera is I would say the human capital there is amazing. So I know we're Bitcoiners here, right? But Vitalik from Ethereum was actually just in Prospera, I believe maybe like a month or two ago. Also, Brian Armstrong of Coinbase invested, I believe, about 120 million into the zone. So basically, the area is extremely Bitcoin and crypto friendly. But I'll say Bitcoin is kind of like the primary, thing there.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I had the chance to spend 2 weeks in actual the villas of the golf
Yeah,
course
yeah.
because I was used to work at Bitterfield. It's like
Oh, cool.
crypto Bitcoin.
Yeah.
You heard it?
Yeah, of
Yes.
course.
Okay.
Yeah, no, like yeah, no, like they're great.
We did a offsite with the whole team there.
Oh,
So
wow.
now we stayed. That was really cool. Obviously, we visited and we did a meetup at the Bitcoin Center. It's really great place as well. So I can attest it's true and it's real. What about the rest of the islands? I also heard some friends that maybe the rest of the island is not as developed in terms of infrastructure. It's hard to get around. Also, like people are trying to orange pill the people from the island, but it can be difficult because some people don't even want to do the trip from one part of the island to the other. Is there things being done outside of Prospera on the island of Roatan? Do you see any like development in that regards? Because I don't know how much time you need to stay in Prospera in order for this to be valid. Is there any time restriction? So I imagine the people that need to go for a certain amount of time, they still want to enjoy their time that they spend over there, right? So can you describe a little bit the vibes of the islands and what you can do?
Yeah, so let me answer those two questions. So also to stay in compliant with the program is that you need to visit 7 days every single year. So when you're approved for your tax residency program, you do have to come for 7 days. So basically come for a week. So the island in general, I would say it's kind of a mix. The infrastructure is good in some places, and some places it can be kind of dirt or gravel roads, as kind of any Caribbean island is. There's tons of very fancy resorts there. There's tons of private villas that you can buy. There are, let's say, like a lot of gated communities, and then of course you got kind of like some main areas where, let's say, locals kind of stay. So the island is there are certain parts of the island that are extremely developed, and there's some parts that, are definitely developing. So I would say it's kind of mixed. But what's interesting about the island of Roatan, if you look at it on a map, is that it's very skinny and very long. So if you want to drive from one side to the other side, like the skinny side, it takes maybe 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes to go from one side to the other side, depending on the infrastructure. But going from one side of the island to the other side of the island, on the long part can literally take hours. So it's a very cool island. When I was there, we actually swam with sharks too, which was amazing. I would say the fruit there is absolutely incredible. The food there, there's a few high end restaurants there as well, and it is a huge stop for cruise ships that come from North America as well. So actually, before Prospera was a thing, and when I was younger, we used to stop in Roatan, for tourism reasons. So which is pretty cool. But outside of that, so it's definitely worth coming. So yeah, you have to come here for only a week to kind of keep it active. And that helps build the substance of the tax residency, because when Canada is going to be looking at your tax residency, you need substance. All right. So like that's the one thing that Paraguay doesn't have. And that's one thing that we kind of give to you right away. So again, I'll just quickly go over what you get, and then I'll kind of go into the application process. So again, you pay $5,000 tax. You can pay in Bitcoin, and you can pay with credit card as well. You get the tax residency certificate signed and stamped by the Honduran government. You get a Prospera residency, which means you can stay in Prospera for how long you want. You get a business in Prospera with a 1% territorial. So if you don't derive income from Prospera, 0%. You get a bank account, will help you basically put you in touch with banks that can help serve for the business and the personal, get you the liability insurance, and then we'll have separate ways that you can do the proof of address. That'll be, like we'll have a few options for you, like at different price ranges, and you could always do it yourself as well. And then you come for the 7 days. So that is the substance that makes it different than Paraguay. And this you can basically do completely remote. So you can be chilling in Vancouver, Canada, planning your exit, from the cold and the high tax and the socialism there, and set up all this remotely. You can't do that for Paraguay. You get all this substance right away. So you get immediate value right away. And on top of that, we're always going to be making the program better and better and better.
And just to clarify, the 5,000 taxes, that's just the tax, and then there's the service, your service fee on top, or is it included as well?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we will have a separate product for the proof of address. And so, like basically we'll have like a service fee that's included with that. So if you end up deciding wanting to get the proof of address remotely, then we will have a service fee included with that.
But the original 5,000 includes your like service fee and everything.
Yeah, 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 of course.
And how do you prove like your 7 days? Like, do you have to get a stamp in like the Prospera office, or you can just book an Airbnb and that's your proof? Like, is there a secret there or trick?
So let's put it like this. If Canada or the UK or Germany or Australia contact the government and ask, hey, is this person truly a tax resident? Are they truly in compliance with the law? We're going to come to you and ask, hey, can you prove that you're in full compliance of this? Because there's personal responsibility on your side. In terms of having a quote unquote system set up for the 7 days, I'm not sure how we're going to enforce that yet. That will be the responsibility of the Prospera government. But at the end of the day, as any Bitcoiner knows, things come down to personal responsibility, right? So in order to be compliant with the law, this is what you need to do. If you want to try to get around that, say, oh, I don't need to come, and then your tax residency is ever put into question and you can't prove this and you are out of compliant, then essentially we can't defend you, right? So that is personal responsibility that's put on you. And also, when you start the program, so you pay the $5,000 tax and you actually put in an application to, essentially voluntarily opt into Prospera's lump sum tax regime. On the application, there's going to be a question, and this is very important, guys. So listen, basically, you stating that you are not a tax resident anywhere else and you'll only be a tax resident in Prospera, or you plan on currently exiting your tax residency. If you do that and you actually don't leave the tax system in Canada or Sweden or Australia, again, that is your personal responsibility. Okay.
So it doesn't automatically removes your tax residency in Canada. You still have to go through the process
Yes.
by yourself.
Yes, absolutely. So again, Nomad Layer or anyone at Prosper is not a licensed tax attorney in Canada or the UK or Australia. So, we cannot give you tax or legal advice in those jurisdictions at all or whatsoever. Again, what I would put a lot of emphasis on is that it's important to cut all ties as kind of like a bare minimum. So, again, get rid of your car, get rid of your car lease, get rid of your gym membership, get rid of all your bank accounts, all your companies. If your girlfriend or your wife or your husband or whatever doesn't want to come with you, leave them there. Hopefully they come with you. You want to get in the mindset that this is no longer my home anymore, because they have center of life tests. And so when we were talking about substance about 10 minutes ago, this is that substance. We're trying to create a case, a story for your center of life. Okay. My bank account's here. I pay taxes here. My business is here. I have insurance here. I have a proof of address here. I have friends here. I have a community here. I visit there. I'm actually on the ground here. You're building that case of a center of life. So if your center of life is still in Canada, that's going to be an issue, right? So we're trying to build that case for you and we package it all in a product for you. So we're making it as simple as we can for you. So essentially what like Nomad Layer.
Yeah, I think they call it economic ties, right? It's not just about leaving the country, but if you still have a mortgage and you have like a lot of income coming from directly from Canada, it doesn't make sense. Like they're gonna say, well, you still live there
Yeah, exactly.
somehow, even if you leave for a few months, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So basically, what I, as the founder of Nomad Layer, is essentially trying to build, because we live in a modern world. Basically, we are wanting to build the first remote tax residency program that is designed for the modern nomad. Okay. So anytime you go through any other bureaucratic system, especially in Paraguay, you're going to be in lines. You're going to be talking to government, officials. You're going to be getting stamps and in-person signatures, and you're gonna have to go through all these bureaucratic office, experiences that's just so old and outdated, right? So we wanted to modernize the process and make you the customer and actually give you something back and make it as easy as possible. So there's no other program that is like this, and there's no other program that makes taxes easy. Because one thing a lot of, let's say, Bitcoiners and libertarians or whoever always complains about is like, okay, you want us to pay tax, but you make it so difficult. We have to hire a tax accountant, we have to get a CPA, especially in the US, so that we can understand our tax system and how complex it is. It's just like these huge books and pages and all this kind of stuff. And this is just completely remote, right? So I don't know about any program that's just as simple as this, right?
Yeah, I can attest that becoming a resident in Mexico has been well, it wasn't that hard, but no, you still have to go to the offices and wait in line. Then you forget the document, you have to come back. It's really annoying and bureaucratic. Okay, I want to get into the harder question. So how about, I mean, maybe this is not for everyone, but how about someone that has a family, kids? How would that work in that case?
Yeah, so basically this would be kind of a per person thing. Now, I get a lot of questions about like, hey, what about my 12-year-old child, right? Well, if your 12-year-old child, honestly isn't, let's say, having any income right now, their taxes are going to be zero no matter what. So I wouldn't say that it would be the most important thing for them to get the tax residency. But if you're making any income at all, I would say that this is a good program for you. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. So basically, if it's like you and your wife or you and your husband, and you both are having remote jobs, and then you like there's not necessarily a family package, right? So you guys would both pay the $5,000 tax. But if you guys have any children or anything like that, and they're not making any income, there's really no point for them to do the program because, I mean, their taxes are already zero because they're making the zero, right? So you got to think about that too.
Right. And maybe that's a harder question. So, I've heard Prospera, it took a while before. I don't know exactly the story behind Prospera. I listened to some podcasts in the past. So it was quite a challenge to kind of obtain the special status. And some people are theorizing that in the future there will be way more micro nations, micro places like that, because people need to compete for capital, and this is just something that is happening all over the world. But I've heard that once they opened it, there was a change of government, more on the leftist side, and they were having a little bit more trouble. And I think they stayed a little bit more quiet during that time. So, what guarantees that Prospera will remain Prospera for example, somebody will just cannot be invaded, or kind of, basically, or completely removed from Honduras. Like, what are the guarantees, or what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So to kind of go into a little bit of history and then why, let's say, Prospera is protected is that you had a more right-leaning government, so essentially the National Party in Honduras that I actually have family ties to, you like second and third and fourth cousins, stuff like that. So they're
No, we're good. We're good then if you have
right.
somebody in the family.
Pretty unrelated to what like Prospera is doing and stuff like that. Just kind of like let's say just a happenstance. But anyways, so the National Party in Honduras promoted the ZA law, which is basically where you can go out there and you can create zones. All right. So basically, this is essentially a jobs program for Hondurans and to make it easier to bring in foreign capital. Okay. Because right now, they have to pay a certain amount of the taxes that the zone makes to Honduras. So basically, the Honduran government is already making money off the zone, and they're making a lot of money off the zone. Because about 12% of the tax revenue goes straight back to the Honduran government, just basically for like leaving them alone. So as any type of incentive, if they're making money on it, they're not gonna, like they're not gonna mess with it, right? First of all. Second of all, they have to hire 90% Hondurans. Okay. So when you have a zone like Prospera that is basically employing a lot of local Hondurans, if you mess with that zone, then you're messing with the income of a lot of Hondurans. And these are, I mean, like let's be honest, like Honduras is not the richest country in the world. Some people even forget about Honduras. I know El Salvador has been on the news because, of Bukele and stuff like that. And Honduras is right next door, and no one even thinks about Honduras, right? And El Salvador has done some great things as well. But Honduras is still a pretty poor country. So if you have the zone that's paying extremely high wages, in Honduran terms, and again, they have to hire 90% Hondurans, and the government comes in and takes that away, you're going to upset and steal a lot of jobs from Honduran. So when it comes to incentive, there's no incentive to do it. And also, it's protected by various international treaties, as well as, just to be quite frank, there is a lot of US investment into these zones. And I don't think Honduras is going to try to mess with the US, especially now. Right. So, what happened, what you're kind of explaining is that a more left leaning government came in, and it was mostly just a lot of political nonsense that were saying like, oh, these colonizers are coming in, stuff like that. But in practice, they did not do anything. And Prospera still continued to grow rapidly because, again, it is legal under, like with various international treaties and stuff like that. And even last year when the leftist government came in, Coinbase was still bullish on the projects and invested 120 million. And that's about the time that I got involved on, because what I was thinking is like, what does Brian Armstrong of Coinbase know that I don't know? Right. So you have this political scare, but actually when there's like quote unquote like blood on the streets, with any program, you got big investors coming in that are kind of like, let's say I'm like buying on like the ZA or like the Prospera dip in a way, even though like they're still building, right? So, and right now the National Party is back into power. And so things are gonna progress even faster than before. So long story short, the leftist government was in and Prospera did not budge at all, and it kept on growing, and a lot of huge investors were still coming in and investing. So basically, it was a non-issue and kind of just like a political thing, whatever, which it does scare a lot of people for sure, but it really wasn't an issue in practice.
Curious, like what exactly the 120 million went to? Like, I don't understand, like the legal structure, or they're gonna. Do you have any idea?
I have no idea. Since I don't work for Prospera or affiliated with them in that manner, I don't know. But they've received tons of investment from other big investment firms in the U.S. and also, especially in Central America as well. So it's not just U.S. based, and especially, like I'm sure you can find a list of various investors. I personally have maybe about 20 friends that are more like retail investors as well. So when it comes to like, let's say like their cap table, whatever, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I'm sure it's pretty like versatile between like big VC firms and then like small like retail investors as well, which is good.
And talking about businesses, so there's a lot of I know that there's a lot of crypto companies, Bitcoin companies, such as wallets, opening corporate accounts and having like their HQ in Prospera. There's also some experimental medicines being developed or methods. Didn't like Kim Kardashian or like somebody famous went to like do a treatment in Honduras or something like that. So you're probably aware, like what are the advantages from corporate point of view in terms of experimenting new stuff and not necessarily having to go through a lot of permissions or permits. What do you know about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I know as much as let's say like the public person, and I have a lot of friends who kind of work in the industry. I don't, like I, I work more kind of like in the tax and Bitcoin space, and residencies. I don't know. So I can't speak too much on that. But I would say kind of like, let's say from like a liberty minded person, so if you're Bitcoin, you're a libertarian, you're a minarchist, an anarcho-capitalist, or a conservatarian, or, whatever you lean, typically you want to be in a jurisdiction that has less rules so the market can kind of innovate. So what we're seeing is our crazy libertarian ideas actually working out in real life. What other jurisdiction do we see in this world where we can kind of experiment and see how a more free jurisdiction is going to start developing and really in this industry. So it's quite fascinating that the two main industries that came to Prospera were, of course, in the crypto space, but also in the bio world as well, saying, hey, like like, let's say we're trying to get a new drug policy in the US passed, but we have to go through the FDA. We're gonna have to pay them a few $1 million, but only like big companies, can have like, let's say like the lobbying power to get their drug passed and stuff like that. Well, here it's just more of an open market. So it's interesting to see from kind of like a libertarian point of view, seeing how the market is reacting to certain industries and what industries are coming in and how they're developing and stuff like that. So it's really fascinating from that point of view. But I can't speak too much on that because that's not my area of expertise. But from like kind of like a libertarian minded thing, like I think it's very cool and very exciting, and in a way it can be kind of scary at the same time. But if we truly believe that the market is kind of like, let's say, like the one source of truth, type thing, and also tailoring that in with personal responsibility, this restriction is practicing what we've been imagining our whole life, right? So from that point of view, it's absolutely like it's cool, but it's kind of scary. But like, let's actually see what the market and personal responsibility develops into, and that's why this is just an amazing jurisdiction. And seeing what I'm able to do, what kind of business I'm building, I got tons of other friends that are doing other things. Like let's say I got a friend who just started a bank there in Prospera called the Network Bank, and he's dealing with, let's say, easier regulations for like a new bank to develop in Prospera. So we're seeing the free market respond in real time in Prospera. So it's just extremely exciting. Like the fact that like I can come in there and just propose a policy and Prospera say, hey, you propose this, we're going to give you like the privilege to start promoting this. So essentially what Prospera is doing is essentially privatizing tax collection. So we all hate taxes, but if let's say you have a private company collect taxes, then what I'm thinking is like, okay, how can we make the best tax system? So privatizing these kind of things is honestly a pretty cool experiment. Because like there's not a lot of governments out there that let's say like privatize tax collection. How can we make that better? How can we make treatments better? How can we make Bitcoin or Bitcoin wallets better under, more freer markets? So like this is what Prosper is doing. Governments as a service and Nomad Layer is doing tax residency as a service.
No, I think also it's fascinating to see this kind of experiments. I hope there will be more. What's your prediction in regards of more this phenomenon growing in the world? Obviously the world is changing really fast, like the old monetary order from the US being at the center is kind of shifting. Bitcoin might be the new center, at least a big part of it. And now people have the chance to vote with their feet, that maybe a lot of people from Netherlands will actually contact your service in the upcoming years. Do you see like this phenomenon growing in the upcoming years, or the bigger powers will actually try to control it and restrict it? What's your personal like vision or prediction about this?
So we are, yeah, I mean, this is a whole 3 hour conversation on geopolitics. But I would say, in short, I would say the world is definitely changing into more of a multipolar world, right? So with US, let's say, bringing dominance to more of like, let's say, Europe and like the Western hemisphere, these type of things. And Donald Trump coming up with the idea of the Don Roe doctrine, which is based off of the Monroe doctrine. And what is interesting is that we have to think how power and sovereignty are kind of playing with each other, right? Because right now, with like, let's say a jurisdiction like Prospera, since there's a lot of US investment, right, into Prospera, therefore, and US is, basically kind of like the biggest kid on the block. Therefore, Prospera as a jurisdiction is kind of a safe jurisdiction to deal with. Meanwhile, like we saw what happened in Venezuela, where Venezuela was very communist and probably not the best jurisdiction to do business with, right? So we have to think in a balance of actual country sovereignty, what's legal, and what are kind of the ever changing things when it comes to who is the biggest power on the block and how they kind of support you. And that's kind of how geopolitics are changing in this multipolar order. So basically, we kind of grew up in a world where all countries were kind of on the same level. I do see that changing, which is extremely fascinating. So when setting up this tax residency program in Prospera, that's kind of what I was also thinking. So again, when Brian Armstrong at Coinbase is throwing a huge investment into Prospera, but when everyone else is worried because like, oh, a leftist government is in power, you got to think and understand where money is flowing and where power is flowing. And so from this point of view, Prospera is a very safe and great jurisdiction to deal with. And on top of that, it's bringing real value and bringing in real investment into Honduras, which is badly needed. So when so when I'm down there on the ground and you got tons of Hondurans, local Hondurans working on the grounds in Prospera, they're getting paid a way higher wage than anyone else on the island of Roatan, and that's impacting real lives that's feeding their families. And if zones like this, like these freedom zones, were not here in Prospera that was bringing liberty and capitalism and these ideas into Honduras, then these people would not have these opportunities. So it's amazing to see how capitalism, free markets, or libertarian Bitcoin ideas are actually happening in real life in Prospera right now. And so, I mean, you know, don't be late to the party.
Yeah, for sure. Just curious, does Prospera has the option to expand on the island, or I also heard they already have like also something on the mainland or something. Is there something that allows them legally over time to expand as it grows, or?
Yeah, yeah, I believe so in terms of what Prospera's plans are, in that capacity. I mean, I can't speak too much about that, but I imagine in the future, I'm sure they have plans to expand and grow, but exactly what Prospera's plans are, I don't know. But I do know is that they're continuing to develop there, build more infrastructure, build more condos and homes and stuff like that. So when you sign up for the tax residency program and you come visit, there will be more options in the market for, like, let's say like more places to stay, more things to do. I would say some of the best snorkeling in the world is done on the island of Roatan. So basically things are going to get better and better.
On the humor side, like I've been bitten a lot by the sandflies. What are your personal tricks to avoid that?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say, and you bring that up because you've been there. No place is perfect. So I would just say wear bug spray. And typically when I'm there, and this is kind of like a Latin American thing, it's kind of suave to just wear long pants.
Yeah, I got completely destroyed. I don't know why. Maybe I was drinking too much beer. Really like it. But I heard also they don't like vitamin B, so you should take vitamin B and it like you sweat it out, and they actually hate the taste. So, but yeah, next time I will go. I will try.
Yeah, just have protection. Yeah, no, yeah. So wear bug spray, wear long pants, wear long sleeves. And, I get it. Sometimes, when you're on a Caribbean island, you want to be in shorts or your swimsuit with your shirt off or, or a tank top and get some sun. But, also you can just dress nice too, which, I think it's kind of like a suave thing to do in Latin America. Especially if you come from Europe or Canada where you might not be used to the sun. Maybe you want to wear a hat so you don't get sunburned and stuff like that. But each place has its I never like to say problems, but I'd say it has its opportunities. So if you're getting beaten up by sandflies, it's just an excuse to just wear long pants and a long sleeve shirt and a nice hat, right?
It's worth it to not pay 50% tax, right? In the end, it's
Yeah, I mean,
not that big of a sacrifice.
yeah, I mean, if you're coming from Canada, do you want to be dealing with snow and ice and cold weather and socialism and all that, or do you want to deal with just like some sandflies and low tax? So I mean,
The choice is easy. All right, Joey, thank you so much. Maybe just to end the podcast, I don't want to retain you too long. What's the best way to contact you? Like, what's the process? What people can expect in terms of response time and, when they can start? How long does it take? Just to finish off with like the most important information.
yeah, sure. So if you guys go to nomadlayer.com, you can basically sign up for the tax residency program there, and you can actually schedule a call with me personally. Eventually we'll get on like a full sales team and stuff like that, but you can get a call with me directly. Of course, you can always look me up at LinkedIn. Just search in my name, Joey Langerbrunner, which I'm sure you can find me on the internet. You could find me on X. You can find me on Instagram. Just plug in my name and you'll, pretty easily, be able to find me. And maybe there'll be some links below on, on the places to find me. But I would say on Instagram or X or on LinkedIn, I respond pretty fast. But just go to nomadlayer.com, fill out the form. You can schedule a call and get it, or get your tax residency. And maybe you're convinced and you don't even necessarily need a quick call from me because we are wanting to set this up as kind of a SaaS model, so tax residency as a service. So if you don't even want to speak to me, you don't have to. You can just sign up. So, you pay, you fill out the application, and then we'll send you a link where you'll go to Prospera's e-portal system where you'll sign up for the residency, the company, the insurance and stuff like that. And we'll go from there. And we're always going to be making the program better and better and better over time. So if you're not super convinced right now, we're going to be coming out with more features, building out a whole platform ourselves. Eventually, we'll be around speaking at events and other podcasts and stuff like that. So as other government programs get worse and worse, Nomad Layer alongside with Prospera will become better and better because we are here to serve you and be more of like a free market approach, to paying taxes, which I know sounds crazy, but it's all about tax insurance too.
I thank you. Did I miss anything, or we kind of covered everything?
I think we did. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Joey. It was a pleasure. I have to think about it as well, but yeah, I think it was a lot of information, and it's a good option. And you can pay in Bitcoin, which makes it even more cool. Maybe not right now because the price is down, but once the price is up again, and might be a good option to contact Joey from Nomad Layer. So thank you, Joey, and maybe we can do another podcast in a few months to do a catch up.
I look forward to it.